Vice President Kamala Harris and her running mate Tim Walz are coming off a two-day bus tour through southern Georgia, the first Democratic campaign in that part of the state since 1992. Just last night, the vice president sat down for her first major interview since becoming her party's nominee. She defended the record of the Biden-Harris administration while taking her opponent to task.
We have had in the former president someone who has really been pushing an agenda and an environment that is about diminishing the character and the strength of who we are as Americans, really dividing our nation. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it.
Donald Trump responded to that interview on his social media site, saying that Kamala Harris, quote, rambled incoherently, which is pretty rich, coming from the former president who seems to struggle daily to be coherent. For context, here was Donald Trump that same night in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Some people don't eat bacon anymore. And we are going to get the energy prices down. When we get energy down, you know, this was caused by their horrible energy wind. They want wind all over the place.
People don't eat bacon anymore. They want wind all over the place. Huh? That you just heard and saw, that was part of the Republican message to Wisconsin, where a new Bloomberg Morning Consult poll finds Kamala Harris leading Donald Trump by 8 points. That same poll shows Kamala Harris leading Trump within the margin of error by 4 points in Nevada and Pennsylvania, by 3 points in Michigan, and by 2 points in Georgia and in North Carolina, a state that no Democratic presidential candidate has won since 2008. The poll also finds Trump and Harris tied in Arizona. That tightening race may be why Donald Trump is now trying to walk away from some of his party's most controversial positions. In just the past 24 hours, he's waffled back and forth over whether he will support a ballot measure in his adopted home state of Florida that would overturn the state's 6-week abortion ban. More on that personal struggle later in the show. We're also watching for new details on how the two candidates are preparing, or in Trump's case, not preparing, for their first debate in just 11 days. NBC News reports that Kamala Harris has been focused on how to needle Donald Trump, how to rattle him, and remind people of what it was like during Donald Trump's years. By contrast, though, Trump is reportedly eschewing traditional debate prep and not doing anything to level expectations. In fact, a spokesperson for the Trump campaign told NBC News President Trump has proven to be one of the best debaters in political history, as evidenced by his knockout blow to Joe Biden. He does not need traditional debate prep because, unlike Kamala Harris, he has a command of the issues, frequently sits down for interviews, and takes questions from hostile news media almost every day. Okay, so that's a pretty high bar to set for your candidate, especially at this stage of the campaign with a candidate like Trump, when every little thing counts. And the race could hardly be closer. Joining us now is Faz Shakir, former campaign manager for Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign. Also joining us is Simon Rosenberg, the author of the Hopium Chronicles on Substack. He's also a former senior DNC and DCCC staffer. And Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic. Gentlemen, thanks for getting this 8 o'clock hour started. Simon, I'd love to start with you. Everybody who knows me knows I'm not a huge fan of polls, but I will recognize trends. And Simon, we've talked about this before on my own show, but let's talk about those polls, because those are some significant numbers. And if we look at some polls that came out after the announcement of Kamala Harris going to the top of the Democratic ticket, it's the same ticking upwards for Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, the election has shifted 6 to 7 points in our direction. She's now consistently leading in the battleground states. The Senate polling all across the country is very encouraging. The House Democrats feel bullish about their chances, because one of the things that's happened in the last few weeks, in addition to our improving polls, is all the money and volunteers that have come into our campaigns have made our campaign stronger and more muscular. And one of the big stories, I think, in these final 2 months is that we're going to have a much greater capacity to close out this election strong because of all this money and all these volunteers. I think we feel very good. I've been talking to people in the party this week, and there's a clear optimism about our ability now to close that. We feel good about where we are. We have a better ability to close, and now we just got to go execute and go win this thing.
And, Faz, last night we had Cedric Richmond on, and he talked about the bus tour in Georgia that we've seen the Harris-Walz campaign doing. The AJC is reporting that in Georgia, the surge of new voter registrations, and this number is fascinating, Black women led the surge with a 75% jump in registrations compared with the same 3.5-week period in 2020. I mean, Faz, look, Simon talks about the vibe. I love vibes, good vibes, but good vibes maybe in this instance translate to actual votes.
Absolutely. I agree with everything that Simon said, and I want to remain in that positivity and while operating with a sense of caution, because this race is not won. There are 60-plus days still left till the election. And I try to think about, well, if Donald Trump were to win, which we want to prevent happening, how does he pull it off? And if you go back to 2020, how he pulls it off, it's quite sad to reflect upon that one of the stories of 2020 was how he outperformed. I mean, a lot of us thought the chaos of that 4 years heading into Election Day, he had COVID, and it was just, he was shooting rubber bullets at protesters, waving Bibles and tear gas. It was a chaotic scene. And on Election Day, hopefully everyone remembers on election night, Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, nail biters. And if that were to flip the other way around, literally just tens of thousands of votes, Donald Trump carries this election. And that isn't to fear monger. It's just to invoke some caution into everyone to say there's work to do to make sure that this enthusiasm that Simon's referring to gets solidified, and that these last minute voters who are going to come online, as you mentioned, Katie, post Labor Day, who are not following the news as intensely, are looking for just the cues of who stands with me, who fights for me. And we got to win those people over. It's very critical.
And so, Mark, to Faz's point, right? If people are really starting to dial in now, and by the way, this is, of course, in a whole other conversation we could have about whether or not it just makes sense to narrow that runway of just maybe 90 days ahead of an election versus the torturous time that it normally is. But, Mark, so then we have stuff like the interview that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz did last night on CNN. When you have these battleground states where you do have very entrenched voters, I'd say on both sides of the aisle, but especially Republican-leaning areas in these battleground states, are they tuning in and catching the fact that you have somebody like Kamala Harris delivering messaging that includes policy when that is substantively lacking when you ask Donald Trump what his policy platform is?
Yeah, I mean, I think last night I think it was a pretty workmanlike effort by Harris and Walz. I mean, it was not, vibey in the way that the convention was, and so many of the last few weeks were. It didn't have the kind of visceral joy that we've seen since really the middle of the summer. But I think it really did. It was a perfectly fine and kind of unspectacular, but ultimately very victorious evening because they did get a message out. But I also think, to the larger point, I very much agree with both Simon and Faz. I'm a fan of both of these guys, but also I think the numbers are really encouraging. I think, the way they've run the campaign in the last few weeks is really encouraging. But to Faz's point, you can't get past the fact that, yes, Joe Biden won in 2020, but Trump seriously overperformed his polls, as he certainly did in 2016. And there is something about the two actual times that he's been on the ballot that leads you to think that, you have to take any polls with a grain of salt, and that Trump supporters might be somewhat unpollable, at least accurately. So anyway, there's a lot to consider at this point, but certainly it feels good if you are sitting in Faz and Simon's position than if you are in Trump's position.